Deep within the heart of an ancient, sprawling forest, far removed from the encroaching noise of civilization, stood the Order of Sacred Grace. Towering pine trees stood like silent sentinels around the perimeter, their needles weaving a canopy that filtered the sunlight into a perpetual, hallowed twilight. For decades, this monastery had been a fortress of peace, a sanctuary where time seemed to stand still. The nuns who resided here had willingly traded the chaos of the modern world for a life of absolute solitude and devotion. Their days were measured not by hours, but by the rhythmic tolling of the chapel bell. From the pre-dawn matins to the evening vespers, their lives were a tapestry of prayer, gardening, scripture study, and silence. They believed their spiritual fortress was impenetrable. They believed that the high stone walls and the iron gates kept not only intruders out but also the very concept of sin. Mother Superior Helena was the matriarch of this flock. A woman of steel will and tender heart, she ran the convent with the precision of a general and the love of a mother. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every draught in the corridors, and every sorrow hidden in the hearts of her sisters. She believed she had created a paradise, a safe haven where women could dedicate themselves wholly to the divine. But the forest holds secrets, and silence can sometimes mask a scream. Helena did not know that within these holy walls, a predator was already walking among them, and the very sanctuary they cherished was about to become the setting of a nightmare. The first cracks in their paradise appeared silently, almost imperceptibly, like frost creeping across a windowpane. It began with Sister Rose, one of the youngest and most vibrant novices. During a morning chant, her voice faltered. The sisters watched in alarm as her face went ashen, and she collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Initially, it was dismissed as the result of rigorous fasting or perhaps a seasonal flu. But the sickness did not pass. Soon, Sister Clara, a woman known for her robust constitution and tireless work in the gardens, began to complain of dizzy spells and a persistent, unexplained nausea. Whispers began to drift through the cloisters. Underneath the heavy folds of their habits, bodies were changing. The loose garments, designed to hide the female form, could no longer conceal the swelling of bellies. Moods shifted, serene contemplation was replaced by inexplicable bouts of weeping and terrified confusion. Mother Helena initially treated the symptoms with herbal remedies and extra rest, suspecting a viral outbreak. But as the weeks turned into months, a cold dread settled in the pit of her stomach. She was a woman of God, but she was also a woman of the world before she took her vows. She knew the signs of life. Unable to ignore the gnawing suspicion, Helena summoned a trusted doctor from the nearest town under the cover of darkness. The examination was conducted in a hush of anxiety. When the doctor finally stepped out of the infirmary, he removed his glasses, his hands trembling. "Mother," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "science does not lie, though I wish it did in this case. Sister Rose, Sister Clara, and 2 others, they are pregnant." The words hit Helena with the force of a physical blow. The ground seemed to dissolve beneath her feet. 4 virgins. 4 brides of Christ. Pregnant. In a place where no man was allowed to tread. The revelation exploded within the convent like a bomb. The shock was visceral. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The gates were locked every night. The walls were unscaled. Was this a miracle? A divine test? Some of the younger nuns, terrified and confused, wondered if this was a second Immaculate Conception. But Mother Helena was a pragmatist. She knew this was not the hand of God. This was the hand of a man. This was rape. Helena called an emergency assembly in the main hall. The candlelight flickered over the pale, tear-stained faces of her sisters. The 4 pregnant nuns sat in the center, heads bowed in shame, though they had done nothing to earn it. They had no memory of intimacy, no memory of sin. They only had the undeniable evidence growing inside them. Helena stood before them, her voice trembling with a rage she struggled to contain. "My sisters," she began, "our sanctuary has been violated. Our vows have been mocked. But hear me now, you are not sinners. You are victims." She looked into their eyes, igniting a spark of defiance. "The monster who did this thinks we are weak. He is wrong. We will find him. And we will bring the wrath of justice down upon him." That night, the order of sacred grace changed. They were no longer just nuns, they were survivors, and they were on a warpath. The police were notified. For the first time in history, squad cars rolled through the iron gates, their sirens silent but their presence screaming of scandal. Detectives swarmed the grounds, taking statements, dusting for fingerprints, and questioning everyone. The victims insisted they had never been with a man. They spoke of nights of deep, unnatural sleep, waking up with heavy limbs and foggy memories, but nothing more. The detectives realized the horror of the situation: the women were being drugged. Suspicion fell on the few men allowed within the periphery: the milkman, the gardener, the repair crew. Alibis were checked and rechecked. Backgrounds were scrubbed. But one by one, every suspect was cleared. The timeline didn't fit. The access didn't match. Months dragged on. The atmosphere inside the convent turned poisonous. Every shadow looked like an attacker. The nuns stopped sleeping. They barricaded their doors with chairs. The investigation hit a dead end. The police began to lose interest. Frustrated by the lack of physical evidence, Mother Helena realized that the law could go no further without proof. If they wanted to catch a ghost, they had to stop looking and start watching. She hired a private security firm to install hidden cameras. Tiny lenses were concealed in the woodwork of the chapel, the dining hall, and the corridors leading to the sleeping quarters. Only Helena and two senior sisters knew of their existence. The waiting began. A long, agonizing vigil in the dark. The seasons changed, the bellies of the victims grew, and the tension reached a breaking point. Then, late one rainy Tuesday night, the trap snapped shut. Helena was monitoring the feeds in her office when she saw movement on the screen. A figure entered the chapel. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't an intruder scaling the wall. It was Father Thomas. Father Thomas was the Convent's chaplain. He was the one man they trusted implicitly, the man they called Father, the man to whom they bared their souls. On the grainy black and white footage, Helena watched a nightmare unfold. She saw him preparing the communion wine for the next morning, slipping a powder into the chalice. She watched as he moved through the corridors with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. The camera captured the ultimate betrayal. The man who stood at the pulpit preaching purity was a predator who used his position of absolute trust to drug and assault the women who looked up to him as a spiritual guide. He drugged them to erase their memories, leaving them with nothing but the physical consequences of his perversion. Helena sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just a crime of the body, it was a murder of the soul. The shepherd was eating the sheep. The next morning, there was no mass. There was only a reckoning. Police stormed the rectory where Father Thomas lived. He was found eating breakfast, calm and composed. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he feigned outrage. "How dare you accuse a servant of God?" But when the video was played in the interrogation room, his righteous indignation crumbled. The mask of the holy man fell away, revealing the hollow, cold eyes of a narcissist. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply stopped talking. The trial was a media circus. Headlines screamed across the nation, "The Unholy Father." The world looked on in horror. But inside the courtroom, the nuns stood tall. Sister Rose, heavily pregnant, took the stand. She looked the man who had violated her in the eye and spoke her truth. Father Thomas eventually confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. He viewed the women as his possessions, gifts he was entitled to. The judge, visibly disgusted, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel fell with a thunderous crack. Justice had been served. But as the nuns walked out of the courthouse, they knew the real work of the Hilinga was just beginning. Father Thomas was gone. But he left behind a shattered world. The convent was disgraced. The public looked at them with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Many nuns, unable to bear the trauma, left the order. But those who stayed made a radical choice. They decided that the sins of the father would not visit the children. When the babies were born, the convent did not hide them. The halls that once echoed only with solemn chants now rang with the cries and laughter of infants. The nuns decided to raise these children together, as a collective family. They hired instructors to teach them self-defense. They brought in trauma counselors and therapists. They learned to talk about their pain, to scream, to cry, and eventually, to laugh again. They rebuilt the Order of Sacred Grace not as a fortress of silence, but as a stronghold of resilience. They were no longer naive, they were battle-hardened women of faith. Years passed. The scandal faded from the headlines, but the story lived on in the hearts of the women. The hardest battle was forgiveness. For some, the anger was a fire that kept them warm, they could never forgive Thomas. But for others, forgiveness became a survival tactic. They realized that hating him meant he still held power over them. To forgive was not to excuse his actions, but to cut the chains that bound them to him. They prayed for his soul, not for his sake, but for their own peace. They learned to separate the man from the divine. They found God not in the priest, but in each other. And in the resilient eyes of the children playing in the courtyard. Today, if you visit the Order of Sacred Grace, you will not see a place of gloom. You will see a vibrant community. You will see elderly nuns teaching children how to read. You will see women who walked through hell and came out. Who walked through hell and came out carrying buckets of water to quench the thirst of others. They proved that while evil can violate a body and break a heart, it cannot extinguish the light of a spirit united in love. From the ashes of betrayal, they rose. Not just as nuns, but as mothers, warriors, and survivors. The story of the pregnant nuns remains a stark reminder. That trust must be earned, not blindly given. But more than that, it is a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Even when the night is darkest, and the betrayal is deepest, the dawn will always come. For those who fight for it together.